The observation deck of the orbital station hummed with the gentle thrum of life support systems, but Lieutenant Kira Voss barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on the viewport, watching supply shuttles drift between the station and the human research vessel docked at Berth 7. 3 months into her assignment as the Zenathi Empire's liaison officer, and she still couldn't quite figure out the humans, especially not Dr. Marcus Chen. The human scientist occupied the lab adjacent to her office, and despite their daily proximity, he remained an enigma. He was unfailingly polite, always offering that small smile when they passed in the corridors, but he kept a careful distance. Most species were eager to interact with the Zenathi. Her people's reputation as empaths and telepaths made them valuable allies and fascinating companions. But Marcus seemed almost wary. Kira's scales, a deep navy blue that darkened to midnight along her spine, caught the light as she turned from the viewport. Her blonde hair, an unusual trait among her people, was pulled back in a practical braid. She'd caught Marcus staring at it once, but he'd quickly looked away, that same careful smile in place. The door chimed, and Kira's secondary heart skipped a beat. She knew that particular rhythm. "Come in," she called, schooling her features to professional neutrality. Marcus entered, carrying a data pad and looking slightly uncomfortable. He was tall for a human, with dark hair that perpetually looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and warm brown eyes that never quite met hers directly. "Lieutenant Voss, I wanted to discuss the joint research proposal before the committee meeting tomorrow," he said, his voice steady despite the tension she could sense radiating from him. "Of course. Please sit." She gestured to the chair across from her desk, noting how he chose the one farthest from her. As he began outlining the proposal, Kira found her attention drifting, not from his words, but to the puzzle he presented. Her empathic abilities were strong, even for a Zenathi, yet Marcus remained frustratingly opaque. Not blank exactly, but shielded. As if he wore armor she couldn't penetrate. It shouldn't have bothered her. It didn't bother her. Except that it absolutely did, and she couldn't understand why. "What do you think?" Marcus asked, and Kira realized she'd missed his question entirely. "I apologize. Could you repeat that?" Something flickered across his face, concern maybe, before the pleasant mask returned. "I asked if you thought the Zenathi Council would approve the extended timeline." Before she could answer, the station lurched violently. Alarms blared as the lights flickered and died, replaced by emergency illumination that bathed everything in crimson. Kira was thrown against her desk, her ribs connecting with the edge hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. Through the chaos, she felt Marcus's hand on her arm, steadying her. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she managed, though her side throbbed. "What happened?" The answer came over the station-wide comm system, a catastrophic failure in the docking clamps. The human research vessel was tearing away from the station, taking a section of the hull with it. Emergency bulkheads were sealing, but not fast enough. 3 sections were exposed to vacuum, including the Xenobiology lab, Marcus breathed, his face going pale. "Dr. Reeves and her team are in there." Before Kira could respond, he was moving, sprinting toward the door. Without thinking, she followed, ignoring the protest from her bruised ribs. The corridors were chaos, crew members rushing to emergency stations, automated systems trying to compensate for the damage, the distant sound of atmosphere screaming through breaches. Marcus navigated it all with single-minded focus, and Kira had to push her longer stride to keep pace. "Marcus, wait," she called. "The emergency bulkheads." "Haven't sealed the lab yet," he finished, not slowing. "I checked the system's status. We have maybe 90 seconds. They rounded a corner and Kira saw it, the massive bulkhead door beginning its ponderous descent. Beyond it, visible through the reinforced windows, 3 figures in the lab scrambled toward the exit. They weren't going to make it. The door would seal them in with a hull breach, and the emergency force fields in that section had already failed according to the warning lights. Marcus didn't hesitate. He dove through the narrowing gap, sliding beneath the descending door with inches to spare. Kira's blood went cold as she realized what he'd done, trapped himself on the wrong side with a hull breach imminent and no clear path to safety. She slammed her hand against the emergency override, but the system was locked. Standard safety protocol: once a bulkhead began sealing a section exposed to vacuum, it couldn't be reopened without manual override from engineering. She'd never make it in time. Through the window, she watched Marcus reach the scientists. He was shouting something, pointing. Dr. Reeves, an older woman with iron gray hair, shook her head frantically, gesturing to something Kira couldn't see. The two junior researchers looked terrified. Time seemed to slow. Kira pressed her hand against the window, her empathic abilities straining to reach through the reinforced barrier. And suddenly, impossibly, she felt it. A surge of fear and determination so powerful it crashed through every mental shield Marcus had maintained. The contact was accidental, her abilities amplified by adrenaline and desperation, but once established, she couldn't pull back. For the first time since they'd met, Kira felt Marcus's true emotions, and what she discovered made her breath catch. He was absolutely terrified, not just of the immediate danger, but of failing the people who depended on him. Beneath that, like a deep current, ran something else: guilt. Old guilt, worn smooth by time but never forgotten. Images flickered through the connection, too fast for Kira to fully process, but the emotions attached to them were crystal clear. A cargo ship, a fire, someone calling his name, his hands unable to reach them in time. He'd lost someone before, someone he couldn't save, and he'd sworn never to let it happen again. But there was more. Threaded through the fear and guilt and determination was something that made Kira's secondary heart race. Every time he'd avoided her eyes, every careful distance he'd maintained, every shielded thought, it wasn't dislike or distrust. It was protection. He'd been protecting her. From himself, from the attachment he felt, from the inevitable pain of loss that seemed to follow him like a shadow. He believed with bone-deep certainty that people close to him got hurt. So he kept everyone at arm's length, especially those he cared about most. Especially her. The revelation stunned Kira so completely that she almost missed what happened next. Marcus had found what Dr. Reeves had been pointing at: an emergency locker containing pressure suits, but the mechanism was jammed. He was trying to pry it open with a piece of broken equipment when the lab's outer window cracked. The sound galvanized Kira into action. She spun from the window and ran, her longer stride eating up the distance to the nearest emergency station. Her fingers flew over the controls, accessing the environmental systems, rerouting what little power remained to that section. If she could buy him 30 seconds, the station lurched again and Kira was thrown against the wall. Pain exploded through her already injured ribs, white-hot and blinding. She tasted copper and realized she'd bitten her tongue. But she forced herself back to the console, forced her shaking hands to finish the sequence. Environmental containment engaged. Emergency oxygen flooding the lab. It wouldn't stop the breach for long, but it might give Marcus the time he needed. Kira ran back to the window, her sides screaming with every step. Through the barrier, she saw Marcus had gotten the locker open. He was literally throwing pressure suits at the scientists, helping them seal them with swift, efficient movements that spoke of extensive training. The outer window cracked further, spiderwebs spreading across its surface. 45 seconds until catastrophic failure, maybe less. 3 suits on, Marcus reaching for the 4th, no. Only 3 suits in the locker for 4 people. Kira watched in horror as Marcus helped Dr. Reeves secure her helmet, his own movements calm despite the fear she could still feel radiating through their accidental connection. He was making sure they were safe, all of them, even though it meant, "No," Kira whispered, pressing both hands against the window. "No, Marcus, don't." But he wasn't listening. He couldn't hear her. He pushed the 3 scientists toward the interior emergency hatch, the one that would take them through maintenance tunnels away from the breach. They were arguing with him. She could see their gestures, see Dr. Reeves trying to pull him along, but he was adamant. The window gave way. For one endless moment, Kira felt Marcus's terror spike through their connection, pure and overwhelming. Then, impossibly, it transformed into something else. Not peace exactly, but acceptance. He'd made his choice. He'd saved them. Whatever came next, he could live with or die with because they would survive. Atmosphere roared out of the lab in a visible wave of crystallizing moisture. Marcus was thrown back against a workstation, his hand scrabbling for purchase. The three scientists in their pressure suits were already through the emergency hatch, but they'd stopped, looking back. Dr. Reeves was screaming something. Kira's mind raced. The maintenance tunnels. They connected to the engineering level, which connected to, she was already running again, calling up station schematics on her wrist display as she moved. There was an access port 3 sections over. If the structural damage hadn't compromised it, if the emergency bulkheads hadn't sealed it, if she was fast enough. Her ribs felt like broken glass grinding together with every breath. Her vision tunneled. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except reaching that access port. She burst through a maintenance door, startling a repair crew. "Clear the way," she shouted, her voice carrying command authority that sent them scrambling aside. Down a ladder, through a narrow service corridor, around a corner, the access port, sealed. "No," Kira snarled. She slammed her fist against the override panel, entered her authorization code. "No, no, no," the door unsealed with a hiss that sounded like a miracle. Kira grabbed a pressure suit from the emergency locker, suited up with speed born of desperation and military training. Helmet sealed, she activated the manual override that would open the door to the compromised section. Alarms shrieked their protest, but she was already moving through into the howling vacuum beyond. The lab was chaos. Equipment torn from moorings, papers, and small objects still swirling in the residual atmosphere. And there, collapsed against the far wall, was Marcus. Kira's legs pumped, pushing against the station's rotational gravity, using every bit of her superior Xanathi strength. She reached him in seconds that felt like hours, her hands grabbing his jacket, pulling him toward the access port she'd come through. He was conscious, barely. Through the connection still linking them, she felt his confusion, his fading strength. His lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear in the vacuum. "Let me go." "Never," Kira said, knowing he couldn't hear her either, but hoping he could feel her determination through their bond. "Never, Marcus, I've got you." She hauled him through the access port, slamming the emergency seal behind them. The panel showed green atmosphere flooding back into the small chamber. She ripped off her helmet as the pressure equalized, then turned to Marcus. His lips were blue, his eyes unfocused. Oxygen deprivation. She had maybe seconds before brain damage became irreversible. Kira activated her suit's emergency oxygen feed, pressed the mask against Marcus's face, and forced air into his lungs. "Breathe," she commanded. "Marcus, breathe." For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then his chest heaved, his body convulsing as he dragged in desperate gasps of oxygen. His eyes flew open, finding hers, and through their connection, Kira felt the shock of his realization. He knew. Somehow he knew that she'd heard everything, felt everything, understood everything. "Kira," he whispered, his voice raw. "You shouldn't have, I'm not." "If you tell me you're not worth saving," Kira interrupted, her voice fierce, "I will throw you back out that airlock myself." Despite everything, the pain, the fear, the near-death experience, Marcus laughed. It was a broken, fragile sound, but genuine. Medical teams arrived within minutes, alerted by the environmental alarms. They descended on both of them with efficient concern, scanning for injuries, loading them onto grav stretchers. Kira refused to let go of Marcus's hand, and he clung to hers with surprising strength for someone who just survived vacuum exposure. In the medical bay, after the doctors had finished their examinations, cracked ribs for Kira, minor hypoxia, and bruising for Marcus, both incredibly lucky, they found themselves alone in adjacent recovery beds. "The others?" Marcus asked immediately. "Safe," Kira assured him. Dr. Reeves and her team made it through the maintenance tunnels, thanks to you. Marcus closed his eyes, relief flooding through their connection. It was still there, Kira realized, the accidental bond she'd formed in her desperation. It should have faded when the crisis passed, but instead it had strengthened, settling into something that felt almost permanent. I felt you, Marcus said quietly, opening his eyes to look at her. When you came for me, I felt your determination, your care. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry, I know my shields dropped. You must have felt everything. All my cowardice, Kira supplied, her voice gentle but firm. Is that what you think it was? Marcus, I felt a man so determined to protect people that he was willing to sacrifice himself. A man carrying guilt that isn't his to carry. A man who pushed me away not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. Marcus's jaw tightened. My wife, he said, the words clearly difficult. On the cargo ship, there was a fire in the engine room. I was a junior engineer then. I tried to reach her, but the bulkhead sealed. I had to watch her die through a viewport, just like you. His voice broke. I swore I'd never let anyone get close enough to experience that again, never let anyone care enough that losing me would hurt them the way losing her hurt me. That's not protection, Marcus, Kira said softly. That's prison, for both of us. She shifted on her bed, ignoring the protest from her ribs, and reached across the gap between them. Her hand found his, fingers interlacing. Through their bond, she let him feel everything, her own fear when she'd seen him trapped, her desperate determination to save him, and beneath it all, the truth she'd been denying to herself for weeks. She'd been falling for him. The careful smiles, the quiet competence, the brilliant mind hidden behind those shields. Every interaction had drawn her deeper, even as she'd told herself it was just professional interest. You can't protect people from loss by refusing to connect with them, Kira continued. You just guarantee that you'll face everything alone. And Marcus, I don't know about humans, but Zenathi don't do well alone. We're not built for it. You felt what happened to my wife, Marcus said, but his grip on her hand tightened. You know what I'm afraid of. I do, Kira acknowledged. And I'm afraid too. Afraid of losing you, afraid of this bond between us, afraid that I'm not enough to help you carry all that guilt. She met his eyes steadily. But I'm more afraid of never trying, of spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been if we'd both been brave enough. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Through their bond, she felt his defenses crumbling, felt the walls he'd built around his heart beginning to crack. It wasn't instant. Years of carefully maintained distance couldn't dissolve in a moment, but it was a beginning. I don't know how to do this, he admitted finally. I've spent so long keeping people at arm's length, I don't know how to let someone in. Lucky for you, Kira said, unable to suppress a slight smile despite the gravity of the moment. Zenathi are naturally intrusive. You've already let me in further than you meant to. The question is whether you're going to let me stay. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Not a smile, quite, but a softening, a tentative hope that made Kira's secondary heart flutter. You ran into a vacuum breach for me, he said. With broken ribs, do you have any idea how reckless that was? Says the man who chose certain death over abandoning his colleagues. That was different. They needed. So did you, Kira interrupted. And if you're about to tell me that your life is worth less than theirs, I will have to remind you that you're speaking to a senior officer of the Zenathi Empire, and we take a very dim view of subordinates undervaluing themselves. That startled a real laugh out of him, brief but genuine. I'm not technically your subordinate. We're joint mission commanders. Then as your equal and colleague, Kira said, her tone becoming serious again, I'm asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe you deserve to be saved too, to be cared for, to matter to someone. Through their bond, she felt his emotions warring, fear and hope, guilt and longing, the deep-seated belief that he didn't deserve happiness fighting against the undeniable pull he felt toward her, toward the connection they'd forged in crisis, the understanding that had bloomed from her accidental intrusion into his mind. The bond, Marcus said hesitantly, between us, is it permanent? I don't know, Kira admitted. Accidental bonds are rare. Usually they fade within a few days once the crisis situation ends. But sometimes if the connection resonates deeply enough, if both parties, she stopped, suddenly uncertain. If both parties want it to stay, Marcus finished for her. That's what you were going to say. Kira nodded, not trusting her voice. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. I felt your fear, he said finally. When I was in the lab, it broke through my shields like they were paper. You were terrified, not for yourself, for me. I've spent years trying to make sure no one would ever feel that way about me again, and there you were, proving that all my careful distance meant nothing. I'm sorry, Kira started, but Marcus shook his head. Don't be, it was. Liberating in a strange way. I've been so focused on preventing pain that I forgot what it felt like to matter to someone, to be worth fighting for. His eyes found hers, and this time he didn't look away. You could have died coming after me. Yes, Kira agreed simply, but we didn't, and now we have a choice about what happens next. The medical bay doors opened, admitting Dr. Reeves and her team. They rushed to Marcus's bedside, overwhelming him with gratitude and concern. Through their bond, Kira felt his discomfort with the attention, but also something else. A small, growing warmth. Acceptance that his actions had mattered, that his sacrifice hadn't been necessary but had been valued. After they left, promising to visit again once he was recovered, Marcus turned back to Kira. They're going to recommend me for a commendation, he said, sounding bemused. For extraordinary heroism in the face of mortal danger. Station commander's words. You earned it. So did you. Actually, you deserve it more. You went into vacuum with broken ribs. That's beyond reckless into actively suicidal. I prefer determined, Kira said primly. And besides, I had excellent motivation. The Empire's investment in successful joint research missions, Marcus suggested, but his lips quirked in a small smile. Something like that. They fell into comfortable silence, still holding hands across the gap between their beds. Through their bond, Kira felt Marcus's emotions settling, finding a new equilibrium. The guilt and fear were still there. That kind of pain didn't vanish overnight, but they were joined now by something fragile and new. Hope. And beneath it, growing stronger with each passing moment, the acknowledgement of what had been building between them for months, what he'd been fighting against, and what she'd been afraid to name. I'm still going to be difficult, Marcus warned. I'm going to have bad days. Days when the old fears come back, when I want to push you away to keep you safe. I know, Kira said, and I'm going to be overbearing. I'm going to feel your emotions whether you want me to or not, at least until we learn to control this bond better. I'm going to worry about you, probably more than you think is reasonable. I'm going to be stubborn and protective and occasionally use my rank to win arguments. That doesn't sound like a very balanced relationship. No, Kira agreed, smiling. It sounds like a real one, messy and complicated and imperfect, but possibly worth the risk. Marcus squeezed her hand, and through their bond, Kira felt his decision crystallize. Not to stop being afraid, that would take time, but to try anyway. To let her in, to accept that caring for someone meant accepting the possibility of loss, but also embracing the reality of connection. I saw it, you know, he said quietly. In that moment in the lab when the window broke. I saw my wife's face, but I also saw yours, saw the fear in your eyes through the viewport, and I realized I'd already failed at keeping you at a distance. You already cared, and I already cared about you, and all my careful walls hadn't protected either of us from that. Walls rarely do, Kira observed. No, they just make it harder to reach each other when it matters. Marcus managed a fuller smile, though it was still tinged with uncertainty. So if we're doing this, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but if we're doing this, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll tell me when I'm being an idiot about pushing you away. When the old fears get loud and I forget that isolation isn't safety, I'm going to need reminders. I can do that, Kira said, but you have to promise me something too. Name it. Promise me you'll let me help carry the weight, not just the guilt about your wife, but everything. The responsibility you feel, the fear, all of it. You've been carrying it alone for too long, Marcus. Let someone else share the burden. Through their bond, she felt his resistance, the instinct to say no, to insist he could handle it himself, to protect her from his pain. But then, slowly, she felt him choose differently. Choose trust over fear, connection over isolation. "I promise," he said, and meant it. Later, after the medical staff had released them both with strict orders to rest, Kira found Marcus standing at the viewport in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. The damaged sections of the station were crawling with repair crews, their welding torches creating tiny bursts of light against the darkness of space. She approached quietly, her footsteps soft on the deck plating. Without a word, she stood beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. Through their bond, she felt his contemplative mood, the way he was processing everything that had happened. "I used to come here after my wife died," Marcus said finally. "I'd stand here and think about all the ways I'd failed, all the things I should have done differently, the seconds I'd wasted, the decisions I'd made wrong. I'd replay it endlessly, like if I could just find the right combination of choices, I could go back and save her." "But you couldn't," Kira said gently. "No." And eventually I accepted that. But I never stopped believing that it was my responsibility to prevent anyone else from experiencing that kind of loss. That if I kept everyone at a distance, I could spare them the pain of losing someone they cared about. "And today?" Kira asked. Marcus turned to look at her, and for the first time since they'd met, he let her see everything in his eyes. The pain, yes, but also the strength it had built in him. The capacity for love that he'd tried to lock away but had never truly lost. "Today I learned that preventing loss isn't the same as preserving life," he said. "That connection, real connection, is worth the risk of pain, that you can't protect people from grief by refusing to let them love you. You just guarantee that everyone ends up alone." He reached out, his hand finding hers with the easy certainty of someone who'd already made his choice. "So I'm going to try to believe that I deserve this. That we both do. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is," Kira interjected. "But I'm tired of being afraid," Marcus finished. "Tired of living like I'm already dead. You ran into vacuum for me, Kira. The least I can do is be brave enough to meet you halfway." Through their bond, Kira felt the truth of his words, the commitment behind them. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would be hard days ahead, moments when old fears resurfaced, times when they'd both have to choose connection over the safety of distance. But it was real and honest, and more than she'd dared to hope for when she'd first met the carefully distant human scientist. "Together, then," she said, squeezing his hand. "No more walls, no more careful distance, just two people figuring it out as they go." "Together," Marcus agreed, and pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home. They stood there in the observation deck as the repair crews worked to heal the station's wounds, as life slowly returned to normal around them, as the crisis faded into memory. But between them, something new had been forged, a bond that had begun in accident and desperation, but had transformed into something chosen and precious. Marcus had spent years protecting people by keeping them away. But now, with Kira's arms around him and her steady heartbeats echoing through their connection, he was learning a different kind of protection. The kind that came from standing together against whatever might come, from sharing burdens instead of bearing them alone, from trusting someone enough to let them see all of him, even the scared, broken parts. It wasn't the ending he'd expected. But as Kira's laughter rippled through their bond in response to something he'd whispered in her ear, Marcus realized it was exactly the beginning he needed.